Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the March 28th Planning Policy Commission meeting to order. It is currently 6:33 p.m. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The Planning Policy Commission is in person, but staff or members of the public may be attending virtually or in person. Staff, do we have a quorum this evening?
Chair Voice, you have a quorum tonight, and Commissioner Kennedy is excused tonight.
Great, thank you. We'll begin with the approval of last meeting's minutes. Those would be the minutes for March 14th. Are there any corrections to the draft March 14th minutes that were provided in your agenda packet?
Yes, I have one. This is Vice Chair Bader on page 3 of 5 of the minutes. It says that Vice Chair Bader, myself, asked if schools are included, and then state large common areas and so on, and that was Commissioner Kennedy. So I want to make sure she gets credit for her valid point there.
Great, thank you, Vice Chair Bader. Are there any other further corrections? All right, with those noted corrections, those minutes are approved. And we will now move on to our public comment. Has anyone signed up at this time, Stephen, whether virtually, I guess only virtually, to make public comment this evening?
Chair Voice, we have nobody in the room and no one attending virtually at the moment.
Okay, we will skip that boilerplate stuff and move on to our regular business. We have 2 items this evening under regular business, and the first is a follow-up discussion for House Bill 1220, Emergency Shelters and Supportive Housing. Kristen Leeson, our city's senior planner, will be presenting tonight. So Kristen, when you are ready, please go ahead.
All right, there we go. Good evening. Yes, I am Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner with the Long Range Planning Division. So yes, this is a review, or second review, of our amendments to House Bill 1220. Not to House Bill 1220, excuse me, regarding House Bill 1220. So the purpose is to review and provide comments on the second draft. And direction needed. Think about, while you're doing this, and maybe you already have, do the changes reflect your previous concerns? And are there additional concerns that need to be addressed? Just as a reminder, House Bill 1220 became effective on September 2021. And it says that all jurisdictions must allow for emergency shelters, emergency housing, permanent supportive housing, and transitional housing. And you may regulate reasonable occupancy, intensity, and spacing of these uses, but you cannot go so far as to prohibit these uses from within your jurisdiction. So the first thing we had to do was change our policy, because one of the things that you'll see that we did was change the name of emergency shelters to day centers / night shelters. Because after talking to specialists, we found out that that is what these are really called today. So we changed H policy C5 on the housing element to allow emergency housing, day centers, and night shelters. I'll get into the rest with our next piece. So the biggest changes that we needed to make with this were to definitions, because there was so much blurring between the line and the definitions that they needed to be fixed. So again, we talked to our in-house specialist. Thank you, Ms. Altamore. And worked some of this out. So emergency housing, everything that's in black was already there, and the red is a change. So short-term indoor accommodations, address essential needs. It's for people experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of experiencing homelessness. They often include on-site case management to aid people to stable permanent housing, which we did not include in the last one. They may or may not require a lease or an agreement, but if they do require a lease or an agreement, this may mean that they fall under the state landlord-tenant law, which we talked about last time, which is when, if there is an issue, say criminal acts have taken place on site, then the facility has to go through the state and through the courts to remove that person from the property, the victim. Again, we changed this from emergency shelters to day centers and night shelters. They are temporary day, night, or 24/7 24/7 shelters for those who are experiencing homelessness. They may address essential needs, not necessarily, not always though, and often includes on-site case management to aid persons to stable permanent housing. Now, this was the one I think where we had most confusion, because emergency shelters, we originally had in our code that this would be for state emergencies, declarations of emergencies through local, and it's not the same thing, because there was an aha moment when we realized there's an emergency management plan. So we talked, I believe I sent you all a link to the emergency management plan, and we talked to our emergency management person, manager, and we also talked with Human Services. And that is covered things like flooding and heat and earthquakes. Those are all covered under the emergency management plan. And there are already agreements in place. And yes, they cover schools, so therefore you don't need the distance requirements anymore, like we talked about last time. So all of that comes out, and this is simply, you have, they can't be, closer than a half a mile to each other. They do have to go through the permitting process. They are permanent sites there, and they can't have more than 50 people. Okay. We had also talked about allowing them when we weren't sure where they could. We were talking about allowing them everywhere because they were going to go in schools, community facilities, public facilities. So this is what we had proposed. This is now where they would be proposed to be allowed. And this is what the state requires, is that they're allowed within places, anywhere where hotels are allowed. Okay. Permanent supportive housing. We changed this whole thing up. Yes.
Chair, is this the time, if we're going to have topics like we did last time, is it a good time to pause and see if we have any questions about this particular section, or do you want to go through the whole thing and then circle back?
You can go ahead.
What do you want to do, Chair?
I've got about 3 more slides.
Well, why don't you go through and then we'll take you back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So permanent supportive housing is permanent housing. Housing assistance is provided to help people move into a permanent, independent living. Supportive services are also provided for households with at least one member with a disability. And this would be both physical or mental disability. And the household meets the definition of chronically homeless. So disability, we haven't put this in here yet, but we're considering putting this in there. This is the definition from HUD. And it's any individual with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of their major life activities. It's an individual with a record of such impairment, or it's an individual who is regarded as having such an impairment. So we're still discussing whether or not we're going to put this one in there, but because we've now included the word disability, it may be a good idea to define it because it's not currently defined anywhere else in the city. Chronically homeless is another one that we have included a definition because that also is mentioned under permanent supportive housing. Chronically homeless is in there. So it means they live in a place not meant for human habitation. They've been homeless for at least 12 months or on at least 4 separate occasions in the last 3 years. And it's a longer definition. You all have a copy of it. It's been this person has been, or this family has been residing in an institutional care facility for fewer than 90 days. And is a family with an adult head of the household who meets all the criteria of this definition. Transitional housing, whoops, I should have changed the title, but their proposed is housing and supportive services to persons or families experiencing homelessness or are at imminent risk of becoming homeless. This was not included in our last definition. And it allows them to stay there for up to 2 years. It facilitates movement of homeless persons to independent living and provides supportive services as well. So as I mentioned, in our proposed regulations, we proposed changing emergency shelter to day center and night shelter, and then we removed all language about waiving a process for declared emergencies because that is no longer needed. Okay, so just quick overview of the timeline. Your initial reviews last week. Going from here on, we have our public hearing on April 11th. We take it to the Planning, Development, and Environmental Committee on May 1st for a recommendation, and then council action would likely take place on June 3rd. Okay. So again, those are the questions that we have for you, and now, question.
I think Commissioner Milligan has a question. Would anyone else like to go first? Since disclosure, I was absent last meeting. Kristen, this is new stated mandated. Does this go to the 669 units that are being mandated by the state, this definition of transitional supportive housing?
Well, the definition doesn't, but if they come in here, yes, then
Right.
that's what they mean by permanent. There's, right, 300 some odd units, or at 30% below permanent supportive housing, yes, that is what this is.
So that number, that 669 that is basically mandated, that's not something that ISAQUA came up with, that mandated, by 2044. These units would go towards that number.
They would.
Okay.
And just a correction, they're not mandated. That's a target provided by the county. Just like our regular growth targets, that's a
Okay.
target provided by the county. That doesn't mean that we have to have that number of units.
And who would be in charge of financially taking care of these different?
The organizations.
That would potentially
Yeah, and
build
I know that Commissioner Altamore can speak more to that, but, say Hopely comes, or Porchlight or another group like that comes in and decides to build it, they would be the ones to build and provide the services and food.
So this wouldn't come out of like the city's general fund?
No,
Okay.
no.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Oh, but, correction, we do give money to a regional coalition for housing, to their general fund, and that does go to help fund
It
some of these
recircles
projects.
back. Okay.
Right.
Commissioner Altamore.
I just wanted to add that not the mandated, but the target of the 664 is 30% and below, but not necessarily targeted to people who experienced homelessness. So very low income, very, very low income, but not necessarily exiting homelessness. So these units are for people exiting homelessness or currently homeless that we're
Right.
talking about with these definitions under 1220.
And again, for layman's terms, and again, this is not quite my area of expertise, but for more or less, use the vulgarity, but like a halfway home, right? Like you're transitioning. I mean, again, I'm just trying to get my head around what we're talking
So
about.
shelter, if you were thinking of the concept of a halfway home where it would be more congregate living, where you'd have shared rooms or more of a dormitory style, but the services are there, that could be more on the shelter side of things. Once you get to transitional housing or permanent supportive housing, it's a little bit more of a permanent living situation. So you have a bedroom, you have a door, those types of.
Okay, and the reason I ask is we were actually involved in a project in Bothell like 8 or 9 years ago. And they had like a common area, but again, everybody had their own, it was basically kind of set up like a condo, but they did have like their own meeting space where they had games and things like that. But for the most part, each family had their own kitchens. And I'm just, again, just trying to get my head around it, what we're talking. Commissioner Milligan.
Okay, now, thank you for clearing up that confusion and for correcting the use table. That answered half my question already. But going back to the definitions, I have a few questions just through the content, and so I'm just going to go from the top, and I don't need to go through all of them at once. I'll start with this one. Under definitions for emergency housing, short term, now I can't remember if that was defined somewhere. So that was one question. And the other was that at the end of that definition where it says emergency housing may fall under landlord tenant law. Now I remember we talked about that, especially concerning the other transitional and permanent supportive housing. But this is short term. So how does it help for us to add the phrase that says it may fall under tenant law, and what does put it under tenant law?
Again, this isn't a shelter, so it's not an overnight or a come in for the day. So there is a potential that please correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a potential that they could have individual rooms, shared rooms. They're not likely going to have kitchens or anything in there. But they can stay there and sort of sign up to, be residents there for, I don't know how long it is, but they can still require, because they will be residents in that space for a while, they can still require leases. Not leases, but likely agreements. And if they require agreements, then they would fall under the state tenant law. So it would be the same thing. And short-term, no, is not defined. We should define that.
Short-term should be defined.
Yeah.
Okay, and then let me follow up with, was one of, and maybe I could ask my fellow commissioners if I'm going down the right path, was one of the concerns about landlord-tenant law is the difficulty in evicting someone who is not following the agreement, because those laws are so complicated and can be very time-consuming. So then the environment doesn't have the opportunity to enforce its own rules because it has to answer to a higher regulatory power. Is that part of the concern?
Well, I'll just butt in here real quick. I think it's a national story right now with squatters, right? So you have different areas that are coming up with squatters laws because of this actual particular thing where they're going through the courts so slowly. I know Florida just passed, for example. So to add to Commissioner Milligan's question, what does that do?
I'm not an attorney, and I'm not hugely familiar with the
Come on,
law. It looks
Kristen.
like Commissioner Altamore, though, has.
Yeah, please.
I'm also not an attorney. I just pay them to tell me things. So the landlord-tenant law is triggered mostly because of if you stay, like if you're assigned a room, it doesn't matter if there's a lease or not. That then brings in landlord-tenant law. And so it's not up to the program provider, but so if it's a night shelter, so the first definition where someone shows up at a certain time and then if there's a bed available, they're able to stay, that does not fall under landlord-tenant. But if they live in a place and they are there, whether it's in an individual room or if it's like the shelters that in my day job that we run, they're apartments. And so you have a key and a lock and all that stuff. So all of that falls under landlord-tenant. And that's Washington state law. That has nothing to do with what this definition would include or not. But I think it is a good, I put some voice in here. And I think it's a good reminder for people to understand that it isn't up to the operator. It is up to state law, which is why I think it's important for it to be here.
Commissioner Krass?
So you keep us honest on these things, which is good. We had the conversation last time because it came around the code of conduct. So the code of conduct is they're doing illegal drugs, but if they're there for more than one night in a row, they become essentially a tenant. Like I'll use the Motel 6 as an example. So it's very hard to get them out. So I think the only thing that we could discuss is the placement of where those are allowed, because if we can't change the rules on that one, the only thing I think we control are where those are allowed to be within the city. So I think that's probably part of it. Going back to the map of where those are, you want to make sure they're not in someone's neighborhood and you have people who are
Right.
essentially, I'll use the term squatters again, who just get in there and then do what they want and then you can't get them out.
And that's helpful.
Well, two different definitions, though. I mean, the day centers, night shelters are allowed to be, they're required to allowed to be where hotels are allowed. And the city is requiring that they are at least half a mile apart. Emergency housing, the state requires that they are allowed to go wherever hotels are allowed and wherever residential uses are allowed, any residential uses. So we
So-
can't change
Okay,
that.
So you can't,
No.
so that says they could be anywhere in the city then?
Almost.
So who is responsible for the code of conduct? And again, I apologize, I wasn't here, but is that set up by HopeLink? Is that set up by the city?
It's set up by the by the operators of that facility. And as it came up in last meeting, they would develop the code of conduct, and they are required to do this if they get federal or state funding. They're required to provide a code of conduct or an operational plan, which would include a code of conduct with their funding.
Does the city have any power over that through the permit process or?
So some cities have chosen to adopt regulations, and what should be included in those operational plans, from what I can see, it would be everything that's standard. You know, who are the managing people? who are the contact people? How many employees will be on site at any time? How many beds will be here? That kind of thing. We have opted not to do that because of the liability. And if we included something that other places don't include, then they could sue the city for not allowing these uses, making it impossible for uses to locate here in the city.
Thank you. Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you. So thank you for bringing that up. Commissioner Kraft, are you reminding me that if a person staying in emergency housing has the opportunity to stay there more than one night, it's automatically considered something that would be a lease or come under tenant law? Okay. We haven't defined short-term yet. Could short-term be one night? Therefore, and what I'm thinking of is protecting the people who manage the facility for those who want to live there and want to live there, or not live there, but to stay there and avail themselves of the services of safe emergency housing in a safe place so that they can provide it consistently without coming up against these vulnerabilities that present themselves because of tenant law. I'm exploring an idea. So what do you think of that? Or is that possible?
So your basic question is, can short-term be one night?
Yeah, and for the reason of avoiding tenant law that then would restrict the ability of the operating agreement to be enforced for the safety of the tenants.
No, I think, again, I think that would be prohibitive. I think that defeats the purpose of having emergency housing or protective housing for people. But I'm going to, Commissioner Altamore.
Well, I think that the whole reason was to provide emergency, safe, protective housing.
Right.
And in some cases, that's very difficult when you can't get rid of somebody who's making it unsafe for others. Wasn't trying to defeat the purpose.
Commissioner Altamore.
So as mentioned 2 weeks ago, so apologies for a little repeat, but the way the law is stated, you can't have anything in your agreement for the person to live there that undermines landlord-tenant law or goes against fair housing. And so they have to be in alignment. You cannot override that in any way. And then the second piece is that the code is only one tiny piece of the puzzle. You have to fund what you're doing. And so if you are an agency like Union Gospel Mission that doesn't take any public funds, they have a lot more leeway in how they go about implementing their programs. They still have to meet, basic safety, and they do a great job, but they have more leeway than if you take public funds. And if you take public funds, there's lots of rules and regulations that come along with that. And so they answer a lot of the questions that this body, I think, is discussing right now. So there's the piece under the code, and then there's the piece under how you fund the work that you do. But the one-day thing that you're talking about, the person would have to remove their items every day. And ultimately, it comes down to the city attorney. The city attorney will determine if the police are able to remove that person or not. Yeah, that's how night shelters do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As opposed to emergency housing.
Commissioner Samweta.
Yeah, just a quick thing. I think one of the key things, of course, is, and it's been spoken before, is just defining what short term is. We know it's more than one day and possibly less than 2 years, because that's the transitional definition, but get more definition to that. And then as it pertains to, I guess, a code of conduct, if we go down that path, we would need to define what that is. And I'll just say, okay, if a person breaks this or breaks that or breaks that and that, you would have to, who would adjudicate that per se? And I know I'm just talking, the way it stands is the way it's going to stand right now, but I want to caution on that as well, because we also have to look at the individuals who are going to be staying at those shelters or at those emergency housings as well, to protect them as well.
Right, and no other city has provided actually what would go into the code of conduct. It says that an operational plan has to include a code of conduct. And to do that, we can't, that's us telling them how they have to operate their services inside there. And that's just
Can of worms.
a can of worms, I would say, or to bees, but yes, either way.
Commissioner Grass?
So totally agree. I mean, the only thing we could say is they have to have a code of conduct, and then they have to define it. But the red herring is they're totally unenforceable, meaning they could have a code of conduct, but you can't do it, but because of the landlord-tenant laws, they're totally unenforceable. Is something that's what we're trying to figure out. Is there a way to help make those enforceable? But I don't see us to be able to do that, except for if we had some way of regulating where they are. But you're saying well, we can't do that either. So I'm at a loss.
Yeah, no, great discussion. I kind of, Commissioner Grass. Vice Chair Bader?
Yeah, I guess I'll add like a little bit of like a rose-colored glasses perspective to this, because I worry that we're like doing a little bit of conflation of like individuals experiencing homelessness with drug users, and I want to like step back and realize that this actually provides, or has the potential to provide, like a really essential service to members of our community who may need it. And that doesn't mean that there won't be individuals who use, you know, illegal drugs. That doesn't mean in any apartment building in this city there won't be individuals who use illegal drugs. And so I just want to kind of caution us from like doing too much conflation of the two in a way that might limit essential services.
Yeah, I think I'd just add to that, eventually, again, this all has to be built out by nonprofits and other organizations that do this day in, day out. I'll speak for just, you know, someone who's lived around here for 20 years. I think Vice Chair Bader's point, I agree, but at the same time, I have seen transitional housing that has not worked out well. And that is, I think, the fear I think most Issaquahans would probably agree with, again, because we don't have it. So how does that look like? The whole idea of being on the commission is you only get one opportunity to build out your city. So we don't want to make grave mistakes that we all end up paying for in 20 years. Not saying we would, but again, there's certain parts of certain city across Lake Washington that I'm very familiar with. Like I said, some of those neighborhoods look very different. That would be my honest fear. But again, that's why we're having a conversation.
I guess I have another question because I haven't been here for 20 years. Why is there none of this in Issaquah?
We do have emergency housing over in Motel 6, which has come up. I'm gonna, I don't know. I think that the homelessness in Issaquah has grown in recent years. Prior to that, I think people just didn't see the need for it. It was more in, Seattle where it's denser communities. But now there's a need for it. Plus now we have someone, that's what she does. And she focuses on it and has said, this is a need. Here's our count, this is our need. So she's fought to get it. And so.
Commissioner Altamore.
I just wanted to respond to Vice Chair Bader's. So there are several properties, Rosecrest, YWCA, there's some others that were built with tax credit funding. And in order to get the points to establish those tax credits, they did have to say that a certain number of the units were targeted for people exiting homelessness. And so it's not permanent supportive housing, it's called permanent housing with services. And so that's what you've got at those locations. So it is here, it's just not falling under 1220.
Yeah, I think I mentioned last time, we have about 35, 39 units here. And they're all at 30% and below.
And then I apologize if this is in the document somewhere. Does Arch maybe for you, does Arch maintain like a waiting list for those units?
No. Go ahead. Not for those units. I don't
Okay.
think so. I know that they do for rental units and they do for sale units. There's not a super great process for placing people, but they have the lists and the waiting lists, but you had.
So the providers, it depends if they have to go through coordinated entry for all, which many of them do. And so that you go through one of those, either 211 or through one of those entry points to be able to then get on the list to get placed in those units. So Arch keeps the affordable home ownership, and then they have a list of subsidized housing. But that's a list of the housing locations, not a list to get on. If it is specifically for someone experiencing homelessness, in most cases, you have to go through coordinated entry for all, which is operated by the King County Regional Homeless.
And then my final, I'm just trying to understand like what the need is here. Does Issaquah, like, I don't know if it's a Seattle point in time count or if it's a King County point in time count, but does Issaquah have like a point in time count?
We do. It's part of the East King County count,
Okay.
but they are able to sort of separate out who has what.
Any further questions? Commissioner Milligan. All right, I believe we're done.
I think she's moving on to the next
Oh.
definition.
Okay. Yes, good
Thank
to
you.
go.
Okay, permanent supportive housing. Under that one, I made a note. I'm sorry, my little thing is in the way of the word here. Okay, so where it says, with a disability and achieving housing stability and the household meets the definition of chronically homeless. I wondered if, at the word "and," because last meeting we were talking about Leo, and Leo would be serving those who have the disability definition, but not necessarily the chronically homeless definition. So when we're talking about permanent supportive housing, does Leo fall under that, and then would that word have to be "or"?
They do not fall under that. Yeah.
Oh, so why did we talk about it last time? Why did we talk
We
about
said
Leo
that they
last
don't
time?
meet it. I was talking about how I had had a discussion with Arch and whether or not they meet it, and they don't. Yep, I already had the discussion.
So permanent supportive housing is going to be in addition to things that allow Leo to go into neighborhood.
Correct.
Okay, good. It doesn't prevent them from. Okay.
Vice Chair Bader.
I don't have a, it's not a, is it comment, are we just like discussing right now, or am I supposed to ask, or frame my things as
I
questions?
think go ahead for the discussion, might produce more questions.
Just, I wanted to +1 the inclusion of the disability definition, because as I was reading this, I realized it wasn't clear, and that disability could be interpreted one way or another on the reader, so I just wanted to kind of +1.
Commissioner Allsmore.
So we were wordsmithing this along the way the other day, and just the way this landed where it says supportive services are provided to assist households with at least one member with a disability in achieving, I think that it makes it sound like it's the disability that's not allowing them to achieve permanent housing, and it's actually just a definition of the household. And so we've got to find a way to move that disability so that the supportive services to help them achieve permanent housing is together. And then it's clear that the household has to have a member with a disability. Does that make sense? It's just the placement of the words.
It does, but could you please repeat it?
Yes, so
Just-
where it says supportive services are provided to assist households in achieving housing stability, and then we'd have to say, and the family would have at least one member with a disability. Because right now, with the one member with a disability in the middle of that sentence, I'm sure there's a grammatical definition of why it's in the middle. I wasn't good in that subject. I don't know. But that's the only thing, is just moving that out.
Commissioner Milligan.
Yep, okay, looking under chapter 18.5, residential use standards, BB. So this is permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, emergency housing, and this BB under requirements says that permanent supportive housing and transitional housing located in residential zoning districts in accordance with blah, 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 must be limited in density and occupancy based on the development regulations of the underlying zoning districts in which this is proposed. So one of the concerns that I expressed at our last meeting was that in the urban core, you can limit the number of, this is a for instance, there could be other things. You could limit the number of residents to 100, but you couldn't limit the number of people who were living in one of these if it's in a residential district, say it's on Squaw Mountain. But when it says the development regulations of the underlying zoning district in which the use is proposed, what other things could help? And I'm just trying to alleviate concerns, and we don't say it here. What would make these, let's say, don't we have a regulation that says something about must be part of residential, the neighborhood character, or, you know, other things that make it fit in with the neighborhood? Do we have anything that would make any of these new facilities fit in with the neighborhood in which they're located?
Well, if they locate with, we have single-family residential standards, and they have to build within the box. Every single-family house does. So if they're going to build something in a single-family neighborhood, it's going to need the garage. It's going to need 2 parking spaces. It will need, you know, everything else that a regular house is going to need. That will regulate it.
Right, and parking, that brings up an interesting point. Can you remind me, do we have a maximum allowed parking in a residential zone? Like we do in some of the urban villages, but in the others?
I would have to check. I think there's something about off-site parking. I mean, off-street parking, but I would have to check that one.
Okay. Okay, just wanted to learn more about that and the capacity that a building could have that has an unlimited allowed number of residents in a residential zone where infrastructure could be limited, streets could be narrow, septic could be in a place where we have sewer hookup, but it's not designed for that much capacity. I don't know. I'm just trying to think it through. What could, how could we help this be successful? Yeah.
I have an update. We just checked the code. And there is a maximum of 2 off-street parking spaces.
Any further questions on this topic? Of course.
Thank you. I just want to say this is fairly frustrating because we're responsible to make our neighborhoods safe, or also to make them ability to transit through them, you know, or in the scale and the nature of our town, and everybody we want to live here, and we don't have all the tools, because the way that this came from the state doesn't give us all the tools to make these good facilities, I don't think. And so I feel fairly frustrated. I also feel frustrated at having emergency housing, being able to be located anywhere in the city where it might not have the other facilities that would help make it successful. I don't know, there are a couple things about it that kind of frustrate me. I'm glad that we worked together and got through some of those issues, but I'm still feeling a little frustrated at the state for what was delivered to us, maybe not fully baked.
I would second that, Commissioner Milligan, after looking through the packet. Again, our state, and it's not just our state, it's throughout the country. They're taking part of our zoning abilities away from us, asking us to implement things that, again, not giving us. So I would second your frustration. Commissioner Altamore.
So I obviously has a bias that has been laid out here really clearly, but I do operate this and have for 30 years, and you've driven past them. You don't know they're there. There aren't huge safety issues that don't happen in any multifamily, because when you have multifamily, you're bringing lots of people together with different ideas and different things that have happened. there are various reasons why people fall into homelessness. And sometimes those create challenges for the people around them, but most of the time they do not. And so I just want to be honest and say that the zoning and citing of these sometimes are problematic because of belief of how they operate versus knowledge of how they operate. And so I encourage anyone who is interested to go visit. You can come visit one of the ones that I work with. I can connect you with other people. I'm happy to do that, but we don't have any more criminality or issues that are happening than a typical multifamily, or in a lot of cases, even single family, where there could be domestic violence or other behavioral health issues. So thank you for letting me air my bias. I just wanted to put that out there.
No, I certainly appreciate that. Again, I think for me, it's also frustration. Again, it's not just this issue. It's a few different areas where, again, the states are jumping into city regulation in a profound way. And that, I think, again, part of my frustration. Not necessarily what you're saying. I've seen successful ones. We did a field trip. Love to do another field trip. Field trips are great. But I also know there are some other stories that are definitely kind of driven past. Don't look at. Okay. Good discussion, everyone. You ready to move on? We're ready?
For the next topic?
Yeah. Ready? I don't think we have another topic with you, do we?
We do.
Okay, go for it. Commissioner Samletta.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, this program we just talked about, like permanent housing, it's also to support, or mainly to support, people from Issaquah as well. So people who fall into homelessness as well are also residents of Issaquah as well. So I believe we do have that responsibility to be able to take care of our own as well. So I just wanted to make that one statement.
Commissioner Altamore.
First, thanks. That was great. But the second thing is I meant to come back to the short-term discussion. So there have been some changes in the funding structures of programs for people serving people who have been homeless. And they sometimes have taken away the ability to put a time limit on a shelter. It's just considered time limited or short-term. And so it's kind of confusing. So like transitional housing is actually limited to 24 months, but a lot of shelters can't, under their funding structure, actually put a specific time limit on it. So the definition of short-term could be difficult at the city level because it's coming out of a lot of other structures that all come together to make that happen. I feel bad. I always have my back to you when I'm talking to the group. Yeah, but anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that even if we put a definition in there, I don't know that it would work within the larger structures of the systems that serve people experiencing homelessness.
Commissioner Altamore. Then please proceed.
I'm having technical difficulties. Just a moment.
I'll fill the time for a moment. I just want to say how appreciative I am of our commissioners that, I don't want to say contentious topics, but topics where there can be disagreement. I just really appreciate the way we're all able to do it civilly, respectfully. And again, ultimately, we'll all have the same goal, which is trying to plan our city that it'll be a great city for all of us, including those who are suffering from without housing. So again, I think we all want the same thing, and I'm just proud that we all do it so respectfully.
All right. Moving on, our second topic. We have the housing element review number 2. So you all reviewed it. You made comments. We took it to the Planning, Development, and Environmental Council Committee. They made comments. We brought it back to you. We had a discussion. We made some changes. We sent it off to all the agencies. We sent it to Commerce, Department of Commerce. We sent it to Puget Sound Regional Council. They sent it to tribes and all sorts of people. We also sent it to our consultants who are working on our housing element for us and did our RDI. So we're just going over some of those comments tonight and just kind of let you see where it's landed. And if you have any more changes, let us know. That's what we're doing. Direction needed. Do you agree with the changes that we made based on the comments? And were there any agency comments not addressed by us that you feel really need to be addressed? So I have only included in here the comments where we made changes, but if you all want to bring others up, please feel free to do so. So the first comment that came up was the opportunity to describe missing was H policy A3, and the opportunity to describe middle housing types in more detail here. I may have put the wrong comment in here, but we said prioritize and incentivize instead of higher density diverse housing. We just said mid-rise housing instead because higher density. We don't really have a definition for that. So what is that? Diverse, we're trying to get that. Middle housing is diverse. So that's how we changed it. Looking at it right now, we could probably put mid-rise middle housing in there. No. Never mind. I take it back. That's why we did that. Excuse me. Mid-rise housing is not the same thing as middle housing. So mid-rise housing is going to be 3/2 housing or 3 stories. Middle housing is more likely going to go into our less dense neighborhoods. So it's not the same thing. So I think they sort of misunderstood the point of what we were trying to do with that policy. I apologize. I'm refocusing here. Okay. We had this come up about 2 or 3 times, and essentially what they said was, let's see, seems like it would be better to describe all the middle housing types. Likely worked. Oh my goodness. So we said adopt development to standards that provide for and maintain the distinct aspects and scale of established neighborhoods, but allow for the development of affordable middle housing types options in traditionally lower density neighborhoods. So I wasn't going to read the whole comment, but it was that we did not address racially, my goodness, my words are so gone and I apologize, diversity in different neighborhoods. And so we tried to do that here by using traditionally lower density neighborhoods, which are usually single family. We combined policies B1 and B3 here.
Commissioner Milligan. Put me in,
Okay.
coach.
I have 2 questions. One is, the comment was a goal of reducing racial disparities, but the change doesn't say anything about that. And so that's one question. And the other is, what is meant by affordable with a small a, comma, middle housing options, when middle housing I understood to be a form type rather than a income qualified category. So those are my 2 questions.
Well, the purpose, so you're right, and thank you for focusing me again. Racial disparities. Right now, what tends to happen in single-family neighborhoods is that you get one big single-family house on a lot. And if you require middle housing in there, the reason the state is requiring us to allow middle housing is then you have smaller and therefore typically more affordable options in those neighborhoods. Therefore, you get different diversities that can come in, different income levels, different people from different cultures, all sorts of things who can come in and buy those houses in neighborhoods where they normally couldn't. So that is how this is intended to address.
Fair, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
thank you. Okay, so if the change was intended to have affordable housing, I think it would need to be more deliberate, because just the fact that a home is a townhome or a cottage, depending on the market, will not determine how much it costs, what the price is, what the price is of that home. I still don't understand the connection between encouraging racial diversity and having middle housing. People, regardless of their race, can live at whatever kind of house they want to live in. And it seems discriminatory to say, well, if we make smaller houses, then we'll get people of different races in. I don't appreciate that stereotype. But anyway, I think my main complaint is that there's an assumption in the change that middle housing is affordable.
And that's been one of the arguments that cities and different jurisdictions have had with the state, and saying this doesn't necessarily make them less affordable. You all saw when we went on our tour, 3 essentially ADUs, and one was selling for $1.7 million. So agreed. Yeah.
Commissioner Samweta.
And one thing I wanted to harp on and just follow and or just state is that we have to be careful if we're addressing racial disparity or affordability, because we have to make sure we don't put race with low income, because it's not necessarily people, it's really people not having access to homes regardless of what income level they are. So when you place the language, when the language is placed to provide lower housing for lower income people, it's discriminatory. That essentially you're placing race with income level, saying a certain race is lower income. So
I
we have to be
agree.
very.
So let me ask you guys a question, because in the comments, it associates race with affordability and diverse housing and middle housing. The policy does not. So is the policy the way it's written okay, or do you all want to see changes to that?
I would say that you're addressing two things. Right.
We were trying to address the comment that was made
Yeah.
without pointing out exactly what you're pointing out.
Yeah, because well, and that's what I'm saying. There's actually two things. There's affordability, and then there's actually the racial disparity of even if a person of a certain race has the funding to get a home, they may not be able to get a home for other reasons per se. And also, those are two separate issues that the policy should address. I know we're not per se, maybe this isn't supposed to address it, but that should be addressed, those two separate things, as opposed to bunching it into affordability.
So we do have our whole affordability section and requiring affordable housing in the code. And we have inclusionary housing. And then, and as part of House Bill 1110, they require middle housing everywhere that it's feasible to do. You can do up to 2 units on a lot. If you want to do 4 units, then you're required to provide 1 affordable housing unit with a covenant tied to it. That is how the state addressed both of those at one time.
I guess right now, it's just focusing on affordability, not actually addressing the other item on the racial disparities. I think that's really the key thing. So that's not actually addressed, the racial disparity in that end.
It's not here, but it is in other policies.
Okay. There we go.
Commissioner Patterson.
I just want to make one observation in assessing the comment on the screen. It was actually submitted separately. Half of it was submitted by, looks like Commerce, in relation to the middle housing piece. And then the other half was submitted by the Leland Consulting. That was more about the racial disparity piece. And I think the way it looks on screen and sounds when we're discussing it is that it combined the affordability with the racial aspect. But I think in reality, the way it was split up there was that one was about the affordability and middle housing being included, And the racial disparity had more to do with having that apply citywide or more broadly as opposed to being restricted, is how I interpreted it.
You're right, they were, I agree, and they were both comments were addressing the same two policies, and they were from different agencies. So we tried to combine them as one. If you'd like to see us separate them, we can. There are other policies that relate to affordability and disparity. So, but that's why we're here, to discuss the policies themselves.
Commissioner Samota?
Maybe it would be good to see some of the language elsewhere and then see if we can discuss to incorporate it here.
Okay, I sent a copy of the entire element is included in the packet.
Okay.
So if that's something that you want to email me, if you go through it and say it's just not covered, or we really need to fix this one, you can always email that to me too.
Okay.
Because we still have time to go through and change these. And if you all want to see it again before it comes back in July, then we can do that too.
Commissioner Altamore, I saw your hand go up.
I really, Commissioner Patterson, what you said helped me a lot with what I was about to say, so thank you for that. Looking at that third comment where it says to more directly address racial disparities, I think that the change really does address that, because it is talking about not putting specific requirements in specific neighborhoods for specific housing types, which was often previously used to segregate neighborhoods. So with the way you described it in the different places it was coming, that sort of formulated for me. So I just wanted to say that in the change language on the right column, I like how that's written, and I think that does address those comments without conflating what we had talked about before, affordability and race profiling in there.
Vice Chair Bader?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I had the same reaction, Jesse, of remembering that this, the comment about maintaining distinct aspects and scale of established neighborhoods as a point, and I think the point in the RDI document, right, that language like that has the potential to like cause harm, right, or to not create opportunity for folks who have not always lived in neighborhoods, right? There's not to say that it will happen in Issaquah, right? But historically, if you want to maintain the distinct aspect of a white neighborhood, what does that look like, right? And so there is a lot of history behind some of that language that has the potential to cause harm. And so I actually think that that was addressed more in the goal that precedes this section. That took out the language around maintaining the quality of the city's neighborhoods and environment and changed it to ensuring that all neighborhoods benefit from high quality services and amenities. And so I also feel okay with the language and the policy change here, and feel like that point that I think that line was trying to get at about some of the kind of historic harm caused by language like that is addressed that goal.
Okay. The next one, affordable housing opportunities such as micro units and single room occupancy housing. Seems like it would be better to describe all of the middle housing types. So we put that in there as a result of the study that was done with our housing study previously. Good point on their part, though, is that we want to ensure that that it's not just that, or that it goes to all housing types. So we just took out the specificity in that. So this one also came up from both our consultant and from PSR or Commerce, asking what are designated areas. Well, the state designates the areas, so we didn't feel like we needed to get really specific about the zones, because the state may change the zones. They may change the requirements, and if they do, then we have to change ours. So we chose to leave it a little vague and just say, and they also pointed out we left out transitional housing, so we put that in there. But we chose just to say, at a minimum, those zones identified by the state, meaning that if we want to do more and allow it more places, we can, but we will at least allow it where the state requires. Okay. H, goal D, which we actually just went through, sort of. I apologize, these aren't all in order. I went in the order of the comments. So neighborhood quality doesn't have the same implications as neighborhood character, but it's still a little vague, and maintaining quality still has the ring of being a bit backwards looking. So we changed it to achieve a variety of neighborhoods, housing types, and densities throughout the city, ensuring all neighborhoods benefit from high-quality services and amenities, rather than maintaining the quality of the city's neighborhoods and environment. Okay, all right. Policy D2, cities should consider partnering with organizations that serve people of color to ensure that information about these types of program reaches seniors of color. So we put that in here, to partner with organizations to do so, including Black, Indigenous, and other, and it did say persons of color. I changed it to seniors of color because that's what this is supposed to focus on. It says persons of color, I believe, in your packet. Okay. Policy E1, the comprehensive evaluation should measure impacts on residents and communities of color. This should be explicit in this policy. Therefore, conduct a comprehensive evaluation that measures the effectiveness of city housing regulations and meeting the housing need of all persons who live and work in Issaquah, including Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. So I don't think we can get more explicit. They asked us to do. Those are all the changes that I included. Excuse me. So we are going to finish the entire comp plan draft for review in April, and that will be posted for comment. Oh, I was wrong. July. Scratch that. And then we will hold a public hearing in early Q4 and also have council review in action in Q4. So, back to the questions.
Questions from our commissioners? Or comments?
I have a
Please,
comment
comments too.
because I get to follow up on the neighborhood character, which was then interpreted as quality, and I really appreciate the way that that this has been revised because a lot of times low-income neighborhoods get the lesser of the city sidewalks, the city maintenance, the other things in this. There's no real reason for that, and better to put people who live throughout the city on par with the services that the city provides or the amenities that a city requires in rebuilding a neighborhood. So I really appreciate the language. Thank you.
Any further comments? Yeah, I appreciate the staff's hard work on this. You guys were able to synthesize two different, oh, sorry, Commissioner Patterson. Yeah, go for it.
I understand the RDI is published in a draft format fairly recently. In those comments that we just went over, has that feedback, or in particular the policy evaluation, been applied to comment or the policy? Sorry.
So that came up today, and we haven't done our policy comparison with the RDI. I believe that the consultant did, and that's at the very end of it. But we haven't done it ourselves,
Gotcha.
so we still need to do that.
So there could be a potential that there may be some slight changes in the policies based on that feedback still?
Yes.
Okay. And then one other question on that topic is the GMA goals. I noticed it said that those policies will not be included in the next draft.
They won't. I mean, we're required to comply with them, and they're in the revised Code of Washington. If somebody wants to see them, we include them. We do what they tell us to do. So.
Gotcha. All right. No
They
further
wouldn't certify us if we didn't.
questions. Deal.
I'd like to introduce Stephen, who hasn't talked tonight. Stephen, our long-range planner.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Stephen Biddle, Long Range Planning Manager. So Commissioner Patterson, you actually brought up a good point about the RDI and policies that we were proposing for the housing element. So when we started a lot of this journey to develop the draft policies, we knew what a lot of the state was going to be expecting. So we're not expecting too much to change. We're still going to go back through the policies now that we have the draft RDI, but we're not expecting too many changes to kind of because the state had already laid out a lot of what the expectations were. getting the new draft housing element.
Stephen? Any further comments? Questions? Vice Chair Bader?
Just a comment, and I didn't do this homework myself, so it might all be in there. But there are a couple policies that were highlighted in the RDI as kind of challenging equity. And so I feel like, and I don't know if those match the kind of agency, the policies that the agencies had comments on, but I think regardless that those ones in particular like are worth at least like making sure that they're doing what we want them to do.
All right. I just want to thank staff for doing a great job of synthesizing those two different reports. It's a lot. I read through both of them very carefully. I thought there was a lot of good aspirational things. I did think there were a few things that I hope staff will leave out, because I do think, you know, part of it is you're listening to consultants, and the other part is you have the residents. So these consultants are out of Portland, Oregon. They're not part of our community. So what's important to our community is also neighborhood character, keeping things like that. So again, there were a lot of things that I agreed with. There were a few that I would actually take a little bit of umbrage. That'll be for us to parse out. But I do think, like I said, there was a lot of good stuff in there, a lot of aspirational things. So yeah, great job. And I'm happy to report that Issaquah did pretty well. We've been traditionally a pretty welcoming city. And I think you can actually see it through the report. I could pick out a few highlights, but I won't waste your time because I know you guys all did the same homework I did and read through it. But again, it was gratifying to see that. I thought it was kind of strange, actually, that our newer area next to Swedish is one of our most diverse areas. And then you actually look at one of the areas that are older, I want to say poorer, but and that's actually less diverse. So I felt that kind of interesting. But again, you guys have a big task ahead of you, and I appreciate all the hard work.
May I note that if there are certain policies that you take umbrage with and would like to send those to us and
Yeah.
just, we can take a look.
Like I said, there were very few. I think
Okay.
that for me, there was a couple where they wanted, I think, giving land away for free. I don't know why we would do that. But again, maybe you can convince me. I know they said, or at a nominal cost. I mean, that to me right there is kind of a flag.
Because land is about the most expensive part of, that's what
Right, but
prohibits
I mean,
people from being
but
able
for
to build
free?
those. Mhm,
Yeah,
For
okay.
free.
I guess that would be a conversation I'd love to have with
Okay.
staff, because like I said, that one kind of got me a little wrong. And then again, I do know that one of the biggest things that our residents want is part of our township to continue to have that small town feel. So when they say, you know, zone everything for everything, I don't think most of our residents would agree with some of those. My opinion, be wrong. That's what I've heard for years. Said my piece. Vice Chair Bader.
The RDI is just a document, or does it live, will it live somewhere?
It will live as an appendix in our comprehensive plan.
Because there's like, and this might not be the forum for this, there are a couple ways that things are worded in there that I think give us a little bit of a pat on the back when we shouldn't be given a pat on the back.
So
And
I know you've sent some, but if you see others,
Yeah.
send those to us, because, yeah, we don't want to get too into the wordsmithing
Yeah.
here. So, but yeah, please send those to us if you all read through that and see anything.
Okay, going once, going twice. Okay. I believe we're now ready for report. And I believe since Kristen just walked away, I'm gonna guess Stephen's doing them tonight. Stephen, any city council updates?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Kristen, for the great presentation tonight.
Absolutely.
And quickly walking away right there. So I have a couple quick council updates. So you all may have received the email. If you haven't, you can find it tonight or when it's convenient. There is an event on May 1st with Arch's offices. They're holding a Housing 101 event, and it's for elected officials or planning commissions to help kind of learn about a lot of the work they do and get conversation around the work that they're doing or wanting to achieve in the If you have questions about the event, please reach out to us and we can help answer what we can or direct you to the art staff who can help answer any more specific questions. March 18th was a big day for a lot of the work that this commission has worked on. The comprehensive plan docket was approved by City Council. They also approved the Pioneer program on that date, and there was some discussion on that. So if you want to go and learn more, you can watch that City Council. Additionally, something that we haven't talked a whole lot about, but will be impacting some of what this will be doing is Council adopted a light rail planning document on March. So if you want to learn more about what the city is going to be planning to do for the next 2 decades to prepare for light rail, you'll find a lot of that information in that guide. The March 18th City Council.
Commissioner Kraft.
So I attended the March 8th. It was a date night for us. We came to that. It was
You
really
take your date to
Um,
a council meeting.
They covered a bunch of different things. The Pioneer, it was a really good conversation on the Pioneer, and it was a 5-2 vote. I think they ended up well with some flexibility for the builders. They gave good presentations. The one thing I think is really important was there was a lot of kudos given to these groups in terms of the conversations to get to that point. So it was nice to see that recognized by Mayor Pauly and the rest of the folks in that discussion. So made me feel proud to sit there in the peanut gallery for that one.
I hope you took her somewhere else after your date, man. Steven.
No, Commissioner Kraft took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say thank you for a lot of it. That you did receive kudos from the City Council and a lot of the discussions that it was very helpful for their discussion.
Please, Commissioner Milligan.
So Stephen, was there any significant change to the Pioneer program in its final adoption from the version that our body passed?
Yes, so the final program will be offering both 10% at 80, or 10% at 80% AMI and the 8% at 60% AMI as an option for developers to go through the program. And the other major change was changing the 2-year to 3-year timeline for construction. And that was one of the that we had discussed.
Okay. Any other business or announcements from our city staff? I believe you covered them all. Okay. Any final words from our commission? All right, well, there being no further business before the commission, we'll adjourn at 7:45 p.m.